This is part 2 of the StarCraft 2 history series. In the first part, I talked about the first 3 opens, GSL opens, and some of the first foreigner tournaments. And it ends with MC becoming the best Protoss player in the world. He wins the 3rd GSL Open. He's able to get the money to move his parents to a better home. And I'm not actually sure about the timeline of the debts of his stepdad, but I assume he probably paid that off too. And I don't think I did it, so I'll go over it now. What was so special about MC as a player during that time? MC understood aggression, and he understood force fields, and he understood the use of maps better than any other Protoss during that time. And honestly, that actually carried him for the rest of his career. Even when all the Kespler Protosses came over, even when his ideas became saturated into common knowledge, he was still amongst the best at it. And obviously his micro was still top tier at points, particularly his Blink Stalker micro. And I'd say the only Protoss player that was close to him during this period was Huck. But obviously Huck was in Foreigner Land at that time, and Huck had he had a pretty good ceiling, but he also had some fundamental flaws in his play that made it so that it was hard for him to break through the GSL until later on when he gets invited directly. And I'll get into that in a second. And yeah, so that's kind of the style of MC, and MC's style permeates within all Protoss players until you get to Legacy of the Void, where force fields become much less prominent. But MC is the first great force fielder. He is amongst the great force fielders, and he does eventually change his game from early to mid game centric to more of a late game centric style, but that's only just to throw off his opponents, just to prove he can do it. But I think as a player, I think as a person, he's always loved that aggressive, in your face, I'm gonna kick your ass kind of mentality. Right, so the topic of this one is going to be about 3 GSLs from the beginning of January 2011 to May 2011. And this is going to be different because at this point, StarCraft 2 sort of explodes. So there are actually way too many threads to follow within just one video. So each one's going to be thematic. Like I said, I gave you part 1, then I gave you the Fruit Dealer one. This one is going to be about the rise of the first generation of champions. And what I mean by that, by champions, is like these champions were the ones who sort of defined the era. In this case, GSL January is the rise of MVP, the king. Next, following that is March. That's the one MC wins, gets a second. And then May is Nestea's second GSL. So let's get into it. And I will be following, don't worry about all the other stuff that's happening in this time period for now, just because I'll follow it up in other videos, because I think they're all pretty interesting in kind of what goes on around that time. So GSL Code S, January. So at this point, GSL has ran 3 GSL Opens, and they've come to the decision to make it more structured. So they stratify it. They have a Code A, which is its own like gigantic tournament. Then they have the up and down matches, where as long as you get into the top 8 of Code A, you play those, and then you play like the bottom feeders from Code S, and then that's how you get promoted. And then the actual winner of the Code A tournament gets automatically seeded into Code S. Code S itself is the best performers from the first 3 GSL seasons seeded into the tournament. And obviously, I'm guessing they were trying to build some kind of like stable narrative, because of how unstable the game, every game can be at the start of its inception. Particularly a game like StarCraft 2, where there are builds and there are meta imbalances, even patch imbalances or map imbalances that kind of fuck over certain players. So they kind of wanted to protect that storyline, that those players a little bit. And so this is the initial inception of Code S and Code A. Right. In January, let's see. A bunch of guys show up. I'll go through the list a little bit. Ace shows up. That's a name I haven't heard in forever. Basically, Ace is becomes a Startail Protoss. He had a penchant for Phoenix play, but beyond that, he wasn't particularly interesting. He did do well at one foreigner tournament. Lin was a Terran player at the time. He was actually decent, and he's actually a hilarious metaphor for how I think about prize money, so I'll get into it a little bit now. Basically, he was the Warcraft 3 Lin, known as the Sword Saint, and he's like one of the hyped players to come from Warcraft 3, the other one being Moon, who's also in this tournament and had also showed up in the GSL Open. And everybody was hyped for these two players in particular because they thought, oh wow, we'll finally get to see this Warcraft 3 versus Brood War sort of thing we never got to see before. Obviously, you're not getting the best of Brood War, and this is a completely different game, but that's kind of how people saw it. And Lin himself was just a solid player, pretty standard, nothing special to write home about, but I'll always remember this. Apparently, at the time when MMA won his MLG, which was the biggest foreigner, one of the biggest international lands, and arguably as good as a GSL, or pretty close to it, he won $5,000. At the same time, Lin was in China playing against a bunch of scrubs, and he won $20,000. And so I've always brought up this point, but because it was in the exact same time frame, like it's impossible to actually correlate prize pool and skill. Like, that makes no sense because everybody knows MMA was 20 times the player Lin was, but Lin made 4 times the money that weekend. So just pointing that out there. Now, onwards. Alive shows up for the first time. Bit by bit, that asshole, he makes it. Top is in here. SC is... he's an interesting one. He's part of the Choya clan, formerly known as Foyu, became FXO before it eventually disbanded. He had a lot of potential, and he had a lot of hype as a player. And for modern fans, the player most like SC, it depends how modern you are, but the player nowadays that's most like SC might be Beyond, or it might be Innovation. And I don't mean in terms of play style, but I do mean in terms of play style, not in mechanics, where or like Beyond was famously known for like that 3-rack Reaper shit, right? And SC was also the type of player who would attack very often. But the reason I point out Innovation is because Innovation, when he eventually makes his mark onto this scene, he's known as the parade pusher, and SC is the first Terran player to have really pushed this style of the parade push, which is you get 2 or 3 bases, and then you get bio, you get medevacs, you get tanks, and you roll at them as hard and as fast as you can against the Zerg player. It's extraordinarily exciting, extraordinarily fun to watch, and it's arguably what made SC such an enjoyable player at the time. And even though in terms of time it doesn't make much sense to point out SC as being the inspiration of Innovation, because obviously there's no way Innovation saw his games, there is like a genealogical sort of parallel between the two of how they thought about the game, how they played the game. Obviously, Innovation is the purest form, became the purest form of that later on, but that's an interesting player. That's an interesting player, and he's an important player when we're talking about the early parts of 2011. Beyond finally changes to Terran, and his style is very different back then than it is to now, even though you kind of see it now a little bit. Suffice to say, he was still really choky. He was still really choky, and I think his specialty personally was TVT play. I'll go back to him later when he actually becomes relevant, because he has and still does have some serious pressure issues. Who else was here? Oh, this is a little like, what do you call it? Well, whatever. It's a little treat for the League of Legends people. Little Boy plays in the first GSL 2011 January, and for those who don't know, Little Boy means coma in Korean, and it's the exact same coma you're thinking of, the coma that eventually becomes the coach of SK2. It's that guy, and I have no clue as to how one became the other, because in terms of play style, he had some interesting ideas. Famously, he did this. Okay, look up Shakur's Plateau. There's this the way it works is there's a high ground that goes into a middle high ground that goes into the low ground where most of the map is. And what he did was he got to his natural and he walled it off, and then he hid everything because the only way this is in a TVZ. He hid everything. So what he did was he killed all the overlords and he hid behind his barracks. And then what he did was he built up a shitload of banshees and Valkyries and Marines, and then he rolled out in a 2-base timing. And then the idea is the Marines and the Valkyries kill the overlords, and then the cloaked banshees kill everything else on the ground, and then you just win. That was his idea. He won. He was most famous for being super happy about it, and then he went to hell because he was not very good. But he went on to League of Legends, become a very successful coach. I actually have no idea how good he is as a coach. Nobody really knows. That, hey, there you go. And is there anybody else that was coming up? Oh, this is all in Code A, by the way. And then in Code S proper, you've heard most of the names. I will point out one, I guess, because he's kind of important, which is Zenio. And Zenio is from OGS. He was one of the better Zergs earlier on. And the reason I'm pointing him out is because it was kind of like a barometer. If you could beat him, you were probably round of 8 material. Because Zenio, he was solid, but he never had the spark to become really great in any particular way. And he kind of fought that reputation. He fought that struggle for like his entire career, but never got over it. But hey, that's sometimes how it goes. Anybody else? I forgot Clyde from last time. But basically, Clyde was the most overhyped Terran player in the very beginnings of StarCraft 2. And what I mean by overhyped is in terms of style, there was a lot of reasons as to why you would like him, because he was one of the few players who was playing a macro style who seemed to have a pretty good understanding of how to play into the mid game and then into the late game. But the reason I think he's overhyped is because he didn't understand the rest of the game. He didn't understand that how the aggression worked, or how the units like interacted with each other. And this goes more into like a theory of how you learn StarCraft 2, but basically when you look at it, some of the greats of all time, a lot of them started off as cheesers. I'm thinking like Life or Flash or something like this. And the reason they go on to become really good is because at the beginning of their careers, they focus so much on the unit interaction and unit micro and how it works against all the other units, that when they actually start expanding into the macro sense, they get way more edges out of understanding why you need this amount of units to beat this amount of units, how you can take over this particular part of the map and how that affects the overall game plan. From the micro level all the way to the highest level macro level. So that's an interesting point about Clyde. I will say Clyde might have been a little bit ahead of his time. The reason I'm saying that is because he's like one of the first guys to use the Banshee. I think it was Banshee Hellion opening, but he used it in TVT for some reason. I never understood why. But beyond that, that particular opening becomes hilariously important, but he's not the one that popularizes it. It's just something he happened to do one time against a Terran. Not sure why. And was there anybody else? Oh, I guess since I gave a shout out to Bit by Bit last time, I'll give a shout out to the Best. And the Best became this hilarious joke about Terran players because he had no micro, but he kept winning because Cloak Banshees were really good. And because it was so new, nobody knew how to deal with the harassment of Cloak Banshees. And he's actually one of the reasons why everybody thinks everybody was trashed during this period, is because he himself was so bad. But he as a player got so far just using Cloak Banshees, and the worst micro Cloak Banshees you will ever see. Right. That about covers it. Everybody else you'll probably hear at one point or another. So we go into Code S. At this time, we had the round of 32 stage. Was there anything interesting there? Right. There's two or three things. First is in Group C, you have Boxer versus Hyperdub. And usually I wouldn't mention a game like this, except it's sort of an interesting data point for Boxer as a player in StarCraft 2. So basically, it was Shakura's Plateau, and what Boxer did was he built his starport and barracks in such a way that the normal scan radius, because that was how you scanned back then, was if Hyperdub did a normal scan, which is like right in the middle where you get the most information because that covers the most area landmass. Boxer built all of his buildings around that, so he literally dodged the scan, and then Hyperdub had no idea what was happening, and then Hyperdub lost. So that's kind of like a Boxer sort of thing, where basically Boxer spent a lot of his time doing this really weird, cheesy, like off kilter shit, and it was fun, but it didn't really have a lot of substance to it. The other game to note in the group stages is Jinro versus Idra in Group H, which is the hyped foreigner match, because for both players are considered two of the best players of their race, and both of them were foreigners. Jinro, arguably like a top 3 Terran at that point. Idra, definitely a top 3 Zerg after Nestea and Fruit Dealer. Even though like Fruit Dealer gets knocked out here in the round of 32. And so they play their game. It's actually a complete shit game. I think it's on Jungle Basin, which is a shit map, so I understand why Idra did what he did. It was some kind of like 6-pool drone pool or something. And General just like did some... I forget what General does. It might have just been 11-11 or it might have been normal, but he just saw it, killed it, and then that was it. The much more important game in that group, even though nobody will remember it, is General versus Ensnare. And the reason I think this is important is because it kind of shows the potential of Jinro as a player. And this is arguably Ensnare's most important, most important, but his best played game of his entire career, because Ensnare was not a good player. So the two of them played on Lost Temple, and they basically split the map half-half, TVT. And it basically gets to this point where neither of them can really break each other, and then Ensnare kind of decides that he has to go for nukes and to try to break into Jinro, but even though he uses the nukes, he never actually follows up with the nukes. And even though it seemed like a good idea at the time, retroactively we know that in terms of economy it made no sense, because you were paying gas for nukes, and what was he nuking? He was nuking turrets so he could drop into the main. But after the nukes finished, like, General would show up with his army, can't drop anymore, just rebuild the turrets. And it's not like you had medevac boost back then to like go around incredibly fast to punish that kind of movement. So overall, it's a pretty good game. I still think it actually holds up to this day. I know that's probably a controversial opinion because everybody thinks every game was trash back then, but no, this one was pretty good, and I think it still holds up. So if you can find it, you should. In the round of 16, was there any particularly good moments? Group C had Idra play Nada, Genius, and Clyde, and Idra kind of smashed all 3 of them. That was pretty good. Really solid. It showed really solid play. At that point, people were starting to believe that Idra could go all the way. At the same time, in Group D, you have Jinro play MC again in like the rematch of the semifinals from GSL Open Season 3. And Jinro and MC play each other in the deciding match of that group. Marine King went out first, and they play on Scrap Station. And basically, what MC was thinking was, if you get Phoenixes on Scrap Station, you can sort of harass and kill the medevac harassment, and you can like harass the mineral line. But what Jinro was thinking was, well, MC will go Phoenixes. Actually, I don't know if General knew MC was going to go Phoenixes, but what General was thinking was, I probably shouldn't go Bio here, because the way the map is set up is there's like a narrow choke at the top where you kill the rocks, and then if you go all the way around, it's more open, but you don't. But eventually, if you push into the main or the natural, you go back to a narrow choke. So General was probably thinking the area of effect damage, particularly that of like the Colossus, would probably screw him if they ever got to the mid late game. And General was famous for loving to play to the mid and late game. So what he actually did was he actually went for a mech build and completely caught MC off guard, and obviously Thors can't be lifted, so eventually Jinro won the game off of Thors. Pretty interesting game because it's like one of the few times you will see mech being used in Wings of Liberty to at this high of a level, but it also gave false hope to mech players because that shit wasn't gonna work long term. Just pointing that out there. Right, so in the round of 8, the most more players you have are Nestea, MVP, Idra Genro, Marine King, Nada. The other two was Choya, he was like a cheesy Protoss, like famously. I'll get more into him when we actually talk about the team league because that's actually where his biggest impact comes from. But to summarize him as a player, Idra said it best. There was this incident where Choya was caught playing rock, paper, scissors for games on the ladder. And then Idra made this famous comment of, well, why didn't he just play normally? Why didn't he just play normally if he wanted to gamble his ladder wins away? Which is basically what Choya was as a player. He gambled a lot as a Protoss player, very cheesy, very aggressive, very meh. I will say, this is actually really funny because this Nestea styled on Choya really hard. But basically, Choya did this super cheesy build on Scrap Station against Nestea in the quarterfinals because they played against each other. And what Choya did was he pretended to build a Nexus, let Nestea scout it, cancel the Nexus, and rebuilt 3 more gateways. And then he killed the Overlord with a Void Ray because he had gone with a Stargate opening. And then he had a Void Ray, 4 gate all in. And by the time the units were attacking, Nestea had 1 Ling, 2 Queens, and a few drones, and then Nestea won the entire game because he defended. Just thought, which goes to show both Nestea's composure, his ability to deal with, his ability to react really fast to that kind of aggression, even when he was tricked, and Choya's terrible micro. All 3 of them combined. Nestea had pretty good micro though, so I'll give it to him. The other player that was there was Trickster. I think Trickster was, I forget his real ID now, because that was one of his fake ones. Or was it? Fuck. Basically, he was like a hyped up Protoss in the beta who never really amounted to much. I think this might have been his furthest run. Don't really think he was much of a player, to be honest, even back then. So Nestea versus MVP, they play in the semifinals, and then this is kind of like a hype match, obviously, because we have MVP who was hyped to be the best Terran player, but he got knocked out by Cheesy Choya the season prior, and now he's here in the semifinals. And Nestea, the guy who is considered the best Zerg player in the world, MVP beats him, but even then, Nestea showed a pretty good fight, and then MVP moves on to the finals. The lower bracket is actually more fun. So first you have Idra versus Jinro, which is actually not that good of a match again. Jinro beats him pretty soundly, 3-1. I will say, in Idra's defense, even though he complained a lot, he was actually right. Zerg was pretty bad, maps were pretty bad, but Jinro was also very good. So there's that. And then the other match, which was much more interesting, is Marine King versus Nada. And the reason this is interesting is because this is the first time we really get to see Marine King's TVT style in form. And basically what he did here was is the first it kind of becomes like a theme in Terran vs Terran throughout the rest of StarCraft 2. Basically, Nada is the guy who thinks to himself, I will macro to 3 base or 4 base, however many it takes. I will build up an army, I will go out there, fight, and then rule over the other opponent. And obviously it's an overall simplification because it's also about tank wars. It's about drops, about positioning. And then Marine King's philosophy, which is later actually copied and then mastered to an extraordinary extent by Polt. But Marine King's idea was, I don't want to fight him in a straight head-to-head collision, because if you think about it, you don't really, even though it comes down to micro, a lot of times it also comes down to tank positioning and tank management, which Nada was probably superior in. And obviously back then, and even now, I guess, you can no longer pick up and drop tanks, but at the same time, you can't really speed around with medevacs either. So Marine King's philosophy was, if he was going one way, I would go around him in base trade. And this actually created chaotic situations over and over and over again. So Marine King ends up winning 3-0, but all 3 games are very close. This is actually a very important series. If you want to understand the basic... this is like a foundational series, I guess, for how people view TVT going forward and how people play TVT going forward and how to think about TVT. So that's a very important part. And then General plays Marine King. General's hyped up to maybe make a GSL finals, but General himself as a player, he seemed like in a later interview, like I mentioned this in the previous one, he seemed satisfied with just getting round of 4, and he respected Marine King too much. He didn't have that thirst, that hunger like MC did for winning, and then he lost. So it was pretty meh semifinals, and then you go to the finals, and everybody was thinking, oh my god, it's the 2 best Terrans in the world, and everybody was on Marine King's side for a good reason, because Marine King was the most exciting Terran we'd seen up to that point. Incredible micro, his base trade TVT style was super unique, and the MVP just kind of laughed it off. It's like, this is so stupid, and then he countered everything Marine King did, made Marine King cry, broke into Marine King's mind, and lived there for the rest of his life. Like literally, like 4 years down the road with MVP with a broken back, having been out of form for like 2 years, Marine King still couldn't beat MVP. That's how bad like this mental matchup was for Marine King. I will say, having said all that, like MVP was, he did counter it very well. Basically, he didn't commit all the way like Nada. What he did was he would push forward and always keep information on where Marine King's units were, and then he would figure out how many units it would take to defend it hard while being able to get his own damage in. So actually, in a way, he was actually doing what Marine King was doing, just better, because he was both. Because in Marine King's mind, when he was playing against Nada, right, he was thinking to himself, you can hit my base, but I will take everything you have. And then in MVP's mind, when he was playing Marine King, he was thinking, I'm going to take your army that's attacking my base, and I'm going to take your base, and there's nothing you can do. And Marine King was completely confused. Apparently they had been scrim partners or something, but he had never figured out a way to beat MVP, and that kind of got into his head. And MVP wins his first GSL, and he's given the nickname at this point of Sleepy Jung, which is both an insult and sort of like a respectful way of talking about his skill, because he was so solid, he was so clean, he was so fundamentally sound. It was kind of boring to watch. And strangely, when you think about MVP at this time, and you compare him to the players that come after him, he might be the most similar to a combination of Innovation and Tasia, because he had Tasia's like decision making, but he had Innovation's ability to like take a standard build or take a modern build, refine it to a better point, and get more out of it than the relative players. It isn't until 2012 where you see the miracle MVP, so to speak. Right, so that's the first GSL. The second GSL we have, let's see here. We have MC winning. And okay, so this is actually a side tangent, because I'll make a small side tangent, because you go in GSL March, you have Code S, and then you have Code A. In Code A, you had a bunch of new players rise up again. Rain finally came into the mix. Obviously, you heard from him from winning 2x. Nestea, Yu-Gi-Oh, who eventually became like the king of Code A. Killer, who actually went on to become a decent Protoss during this period. Alicia, MMA, Noblesse was okay. I don't think it's worth mentioning that much. Gonzi, Supernova, Virus, Coca, Curious. Even like some of the foreigners here were pretty good. Rhett, Heypro. Actually, Heypro wasn't that good. Neither was Rhett. Moonglade was decent, but like Huck was still in here. Basically, Code A was filled with a bunch of really good players to be at the time. And the reason for this side tangent is that for whatever reason, as we've gone farther and farther away from 2011, people have become to be more disparaging of the skill at the time, both in Korea and abroad, and for both how good foreigners were and how good the lower base Koreans were. And I have to say, I watched it, I rewatched it, I watched the current era too. I think 2011 was more competitive. That's just my opinion. At least for the lower end. You can talk about the highest skilled end if you want, but that's like a different discussion. And another side tangent is about the time travel thing, where like, oh, you send any player from now back then, they could beat everybody, but that doesn't actually prove that they're more skilled. That just proves they're more knowledgeable, and that knowledge comes from the fact that everybody else has done everything before them. I think a much more reasonable way to run that thought experiment is you send them back with all their skill but without all of the knowledge, and then see what they can do. Like, for instance, can Zest really fight Broodlord Infestor at the height of its power if Rain or Parting wasn't there to show him the way? I don't think he can. Like, stuff like this, right? So I think that's a much more reasonable way to look at it, but that's just my opinion. Now, going on to the actual Code S. What was here? Oh, right. This is actually pretty funny. So in Group A, we have MC, July, and MVP. And everybody else thinking, rightly, MC and MVP, they're getting out of this. But then July's like, fuck you, I am July Zerg. And so we get the beginning of July Zerg's best run in StarCraft 2. And he does it in a very super aggressive way. Like, he's like Kyrix 2.0, except he can do it on 1 base, 2 base, or 3 base. And I remember there was a crazy fucking map he did. I'm not sure if it was here or if it might have been earlier. But basically he was playing a Terran player and on Delta Quadrant. So what happened was he built a natural and he built a gas and he built a spawning pool and he was mining it. And then he let the Terran scout the natural with the SCV and then he left. And then what he did was he canceled the natural and built a Baneling center on the remaining creep. A Baneling nest. And then so eventually later on when the Terrans scanned his main base, they're like, oh, there's nothing weird here, I can just keep building. But in reality it was actually a 1 base all in from July Zerg. He built a bunch of Lings, built a bunch of Banelings, and then won the game. So that's kind of the player July Zerg was. Incredibly aggressive, incredibly crazy. Even when he went on to when he went to MLG, he had like the lowest average game time of like 6 minutes or something, because he literally just kept all inning and attacking people. And even when he went into like 3-base games, he would make a hard cut at like 60 drones for some reason, even though I think like the optimal amount is 70 for an aggressive Zerg. And he made a hard cut then, and then just started all inning over and over again, and then either he won or you won, depending on who survived who. So he beats MVP here with his aggression, and then MC and July move on. And obviously, like, MC and July, I had pointed out, had played before, and they played again here. And I have to point out, this is an interesting point. July's aggressive style is naturally countered by MC because MC understands force fields better than every other player at this time. So this becomes an important point later on when they meet in the finals. Anybody else that was interesting in these groups? Let's see here. All right, this is not necessarily interesting but funny. But basically, in January of GSL, I have to go back. But basically, Son was in a group was in one of the group stages, and he got rinsed the fuck out. Like, I think he lost every match within 4 minutes. And so when he went into this GSL, like, there was like a promo, like, what, Son? What's like, there's this promo for like all the hopes and dreams. Everybody's like, I want to win a GSL. I want to get to the playoffs. I want to get past group stages. I want to do this. I want to show good games. And then they went to Son. It's like, I want to live past 4 minutes. it was just too hilarious. And then when Son went into Group E, he actually smashed Nestea, Boxer, and Ensnare to move on. And this is actually the first rise of Son as a Protoss player. He's actually, among Protoss players in history, he's probably the one of the more underrated ones, one of the least remembered ones, because he did a lot of things correctly. And he actually had some particularly important innovations in terms of tactics, even strategy, and maybe even economic management, depending on how you look at it. So Son makes it out of his group. And then the other one that's really funny, mostly round of 32 groups, honestly, are like skippable. This is why I'm only going over the good ones. Is Group C, and I wouldn't watch this group. It's just funny because right before this one, basically Polt says Jinro is washed up, Jinro isn't good, and Jinro wins the group. Now, I will say this. Polt was actually right, and Polt would, and the future history would show that how right Polt was, but at that moment, Polt lost, so it's too bad for him. I should also point out, like, this is like the tournament where there wasn't a second round of group stages in the round of 16. Instead, it was just a single elimination bracket from there on. And let's see here. On the bottom side, you basically have like Jelizarg running your train through everybody. Famously meeting an old rival from Brood War in Nada, which was in that game. And he goes all the way and meets MC in the finals. MC, for him, so hard, beats Bia, beats Hongen, beats San, and then gets to the finals. The only good game from this bracket, if you ever want to go back, is San versus SC. And this is actually can be considered close to a foundational game, but not really, because the stuff that both SC and San were doing don't get implemented until a lot later. And by that point, there are like so many other steps in between that you can't even say it's their like idea anymore. So SC basically he played TVP the exact same way he played TVZ, but what happened was San spread him out. So San went for this hyper like micro based play where he had a bunch of small skirmishing units across the map, and most particularly he had a bunch of High Templars across the map, because back then you had this you kind of warped in with High Templars with Storm already done. I think it was like Kadarin Amulet or something. I forget the exact thing, but basically like they were super overpowered, even though everybody thought High Templars were shit back then for some reason. I guess they couldn't micro them, whatever. But basically, San played this style where he had a shitload of High Templars, so every time SC attacked, he would lose a lot. He would lose a lot of the trades, but because SC was so aggressive, and SC himself like had a micro. SC himself like backed it up with like a micro focus. So like in Invasion, he had like a lot of bases, a lot of economy trying to back it up. So he went into these like massive like slug wars all across the map as like the two of them fought everywhere. It was like one of the best series from early StarCraft 2, and like the Ensnare one, I actually think this one holds up today. Just in terms of strategy, just in terms of tactics, just in terms of the ideas they were bringing out as players. Now, we go to the finals, MC versus July. MC rinses July out. Like I said earlier, his force field style counters July's naturally aggressive style. July tried some of that Zergling Hydra shit and didn't really work out. Didn't really understand how to play against force fields. And the player that does figure it out isn't here yet, and that's actually Lucira, who's in Code A. And Lucira ends up I think Lucira ends up going to the Code A finals, and this is another random point. For whatever reason, the Code A finals were much more exciting than the actual GSL finals. Maybe just because they matched up better. The two players matched up better. In the first one, it was Top versus Beyond for January, and then in the second one, it was Lucira versus Supernova. And one of the interesting parts about Lucira's run is like he actually eliminated Huck, who I considered one of the top 3 Protosses at the time. So Lucira is actually a Zerg player who might have been able to give MC a run for his money because his EVP is very good, but it didn't matter because he was in Code A. That's like another thing that doesn't really happen anymore, is the fact that you don't have like a championship caliber contender stuck in Code A for whatever reason, because there's like so many good players in between him and Code S, and like because you have to kill so many of them, like one of them might upset you. Like that doesn't happen anymore, and that's also another reason as to why I consider that era more competitive, and in some regards, it might be more competitive than even parts of the later era, like even in the Kespa era a little bit, just because of how many players there are. Obviously, though, I'd still consider the Kespa period stronger just because of the amount of practice that was being put in, and then like the new influx of players too, which effectively doubled the player pool for a little bit until everybody started dropping out. And then the third GSL is GSL March. Not GSL March, GSL May. And this is the return of Nestea. Actually, I believe this is Nestea's best run. Yeah, this is Nestea's best run. And that's a weird thing to say because after this GSL, he went on to another GSL and won it undefeated. He didn't drop a single game, but the reason I consider this GSL Nestea's best run is because this is the one that challenges him, and this is the one that shows why Nestea is considered a legend even now, even though like he's dropped off for like years, even though the end of his form was fucking terrible, even though he clearly didn't know how to play the late game. A lot of his brilliance is shown in this GSL run, GSL May. So let's get into it. In the round of 32, basically Polt's prediction about Jinro being fraudulent kind of comes true. Jinro is basically doing too much cute shit that was kind of hiding the fact that like his fundamentals and his basics were kind of flawed. I think even Rhett's basically said something. Rhett was his teammate at the time. Basically said something like his macro wasn't as good as it once was relative to the scene. And Jinro, I'll give credit to Jinro. Jinro basically was awarded. People tried to award him like multiple times the GSL seed because back then GSL sometimes invited players into the system, and Jinro always refused because he always felt like that was, in a way, affirmative action, because they obviously it would be good for both of them. Like obviously he gets a spot in the GSL, they get a foreigner into their league, but he always thought, you know what, that's kind of bullshit because I've been playing with these guys for years. I know that they deserve it if they beat me. So that's always what he thought about it, and I've always respected Jinro for that. So salute to him. Right. So beyond that, Polt moves on from Group A, even though he doesn't play Jinro. Jinro goes out of Group E. I will say Clyde Nestea is pretty tough. Clyde Nestea-san is a really tough group, but Jinro himself didn't do himself any favors with how he played. Like he had some cute openings that were mis-executed. And let's see here in the I also remember this bracket being very boring. Okay, it's the top side of the bracket, basically. Not a lot of interesting things. I will say in the semifinals you had Nada versus Inca, and everybody was super hyped for Nada, and the reason was because this was probably Nada's best form in StarCraft 2. Like he had basically been taking it easy for months, and like he was still a pretty good player, but this was like the GSL where he really tried to go for it, really tried to win, and then Inca just cheesed him out. And then Inca famously was a complete shit player in the finals where he only went DT Rush. He looked like he was about to cry. He probably should have cried because that was a terrible finals. And that's about it. Now for Nestea actually goes on a crazy fucking run up until the finals where obviously he got a free easy win against Inca. First one, he beats Fruit Dealer, and I mentioned this in the Fruit Dealer one. This is actually a very good series. First best CVZ series in StarCraft 2, where the two of them really fought back and forth, where you can kind of see the understanding of both players about how to play this matchup and what to do in that matchup. The second matchup is absolutely hilarious. It's Nestea versus AnyPro, and I haven't talked about AnyPro at all because he's kind of like a nondescript Protoss, but he's basically the first player in StarCraft 2 to believe in the forge opening for the 2-base forge opening for Protoss. And usually he would get some credit for that just because that's actually the standard opening for like the next few years up until Legacy of the Void, where you get adepts and shit, but adepts or Mothership Core and shit like that. But back then, AnyPro, what he was thinking was he was trying to do it on maps that were not suited for it. Like there'd be maps with like gigantic open naturals where like 270 degrees from attack, and he'd still be trying to do it. And so this was his only opening. And so what Nestea did in one of the games was it was dual sight. What he did was he upgraded to layer early on, and then he had his Overlord drop creep, and he sent 2 drones over. And everyone was like, why are you doing this? And then he built 2 spine crawlers on top of the creep, which was outside of the range of AnyPro's cannons, killed the Nexus, and then followed up with Hydras and Lings. And basically, he literally broke AnyPro's mind. AnyPro had not practiced any other build except for the Forge opening. It's clear from the rest of the series. And AnyPro like basically lost that series. He had already been broken from game one. And most funnily enough, Nestea never used that build ever again, even though it became very popular throughout the world for like the next 1 to 2 months. So Nestea literally broke AnyPro's mind in one game. He won that series in one game, and that's like part of Nestea's genius is he had a lot of these like niche builds, right? He would pull out randomly in a series that would like completely stomp the series in terms of like the mental strategy of the game, and that was the most prominent example of Nestea doing that. And then the best series of that tournament and the best series up to that point in StarCraft 2 history is Nestea versus SC. Like I pointed out earlier, SC is an important figure in the early parts of StarCraft 2, and this is the reason why. Basically, SC versus Nestea is the first game that actually proves the potential of StarCraft 2 in my eyes as an entertaining game. And so, like I said earlier, SC played a little bit like how you would think of innovation in 2013 if you saw that 2-base, 3-base macro into hyper aggressive parade pushing until one of you died. And Nestea was that smart like solid defensive player, and he barely survived every push. It went back and forth, series after series after series. Like it went down 2-2, and they went to the final map, and then Nestea started pulling out like a bunch of crazy shit, like burrowed Bailings, which nobody had seen for the first time, counterattacks with Zerg, while trying to defend, like a la Life later on, when Life basically changed the game tactically speaking. There was like there's Muta counters, there's Link counters, Bailing counters. There was the constant parade pushes from SC, and at the very end, what started off as a macro game ended in like a one versus one base game with like a handful of units from both sides. It was like incredibly scrappy. It was like 12 different types of units for both players, and eventually SC makes for this last push because Nestea is still mining, whereas his last base was like fucked up because Nestea had burrowed a Ling there and he can like land perfectly. So SC goes for his last final push. Nestea like holds for the very last time, and then Nestea wins, and that becomes like the best series of early StarCraft 2, one of the best games in all of StarCraft 2 still, and definitely a game that holds up today. Definitely watch that if you've never seen that one before. You'll be surprised how good it is. Right. So that covers this section of StarCraft 2 history. The reason I call this the three champions, or the first generation of champions, is because these are the three guys who end up defining the first era of StarCraft 2 and defining the very base fundamentals of how we think about each race. MC, aggressive Protoss that uses a lot of force fields, uses a lot of maps, uses a lot of map architecture to his favor, and his style of thinking controls all of StarCraft 2 for Protoss up until you see Raid. Arguably, you can say Hero, but Hero's stuff isn't really relevant in the sense that nobody else really used it until Rain kind of used it to a better extent. And even then, like, Hero's thing is mostly about war prisms. It isn't about like the build orders and the refinement and the unit compositions, which is all Rain shit, right? So Nestea, how did he change the game? Basically, he was the guy who thought about, besides all these cheesy builds, he thought about the larva inject the most. He thought about how it worked with the economy, and he thought about how to time it. So basically, he is the guy who believed that he would get to like 80 to 90 drones. He would do this regularly, and then he would try to spam you down with a lot of Ling Bling Muta, and that was his kind of style of play. And because of it, it was very effective. But obviously, and as a player, he's actually very good against defending all-ins. But this covered a huge fucking weakness in his gameplay that we find out later, is that he cannot play the late game for the life of him. So that's Nestea, and his style of play creates like the foundation of how a lot of Zergs think about the game. even though it actually gets phased out later, and then it's resurrected by somebody who had never seen Nestea play, which is Sue. But that's like a different story altogether. And obviously, they both came to the same conclusions. Just Sue was way better at it. So MVP is the last of them. And MVP, like I said, he's like a mix between Tasia and Innovation at this time. He's a player who had taken like he had taken Jinro's ideas of 3-base macro. He had taken some old Brood War builds. He had taken Marine King's ideas of how to macro the units, combined them into a complete whole, and he had his own solid fundamentals. And as a player, he was extraordinarily strong, even though boring at the time. And these three would define the first year of StarCraft 2, and in a way define how people thought of StarCraft 2, the StarCraft 2 races. All right, see you next time.